What's going on, everybody? It's Professor Gnome, and I'm actually joined here with Control Players Unite, or otherwise known as Dr. Red, doing a new series that we wanted to bring to you guys called Office Hours. This is a series where we're going to be reviewing submitted deck lists, kind of editing them, showing some deck building tips, and showing what we're able to do with the lists that you submit to us. And so, yeah, we have two lists. We got a lot of submissions for this, so unfortunately we can't cover everyone, but this is a thing that we want to be doing more in the future, so hopefully we'll be able to check out some of the other lists as time goes on. Thank you to everybody who submitted it. It really is appreciated. Before we jump into this, though, I do want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thank you guys so much for that additional level of support. It really does go a long way and does mean a lot, so thank you very much. For everyone else, this is content that you want to see in the future. Be sure to like, comment, and let us know. And definitely go and check out Control Players Unite. His link to his channel will be down in the description. Definitely give his channel a shout as well as mine as this continues. But yeah, I guess we'll waste no time and we'll jump into the first submitted deck. And that's a really interesting Hydreigon list that was sent in with a stipulation on the building. I think that's very important to point out before we go forward. The Hydreigon list wanted to be built purely rotation ready, so we are only allowed to use cards that are up to or like will be a part of the upcoming rotation. So that made the building a little bit interesting, but the original list is it's interesting for sure. They want to be able to use Blissey in order to move energy to utilize the Obsidian attack from Hydreigon, but I think one of the issues that they had when it comes to this building idea is that they went very, very hard into the concept, where they kind of overkilled the concept a little bit and made the deck struggle when that concept isn't able to be utilized effectively. Yeah.
I could see that.
Yeah, and so like what I mean by that is that we see triple glass trumpet, which is fine. We also see double crispin. This is also okay. But on top of that, we see the heavy batons, we see the EXP share, that these start to become a little bit redundant. And then on top of that, we have a very large amount of switch cards that we don't really need. So seeing things like the Surfer or the Jet Energy don't really benefit us as much, especially when we already have the Tauros scenario in our, like, available to play to pick up whatever's in our active if we need to move it. As well as the one copy of Carmine is only really beneficial on that first turn. Outside of that, research is probably just better. So yeah, I would say like those are some of the things. Like the over-reliance on the concept is one of the things really hurting this deck overall, in my opinion. Then,
Yeah. Oh, good. Sorry, go on.
no, so continue.
No, I just was pausing. Yeah, the Cyclozar's kind of throwing me off a bit. I think they're trying to go for the whole bench damage thing, but for 3 colorless energy, probably isn't worth it.
Yeah, so if we go and we switch to my edit of the list and kind of the way that I decided to build it instead, I still want to stay true to the concept, right? We want to make sure that we're staying true to what that build is, but I decided to swap the Cyclozar for the Terapagos EX. I think that's how you're supposed to say it, right? Terapagos?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, Terapagos.
Okay, I always say it wrong, so. But one of the things that I did to edit is that I want to make sure that Hydreigon can still function on its own, even if we're not getting the Blissey combo off right away. The easiest way to do this is obviously to change out the A-spec of choice and go with the Neo Upper Energy. So that way, we can just throw that down onto our Hydreigon. We can start attacking with the Crushing Headbutt if we have to. Also, we'll be able to use the Obsidian attack a little bit easier, because we can always get, like, we run a copy of the counter gain, so it's Neo Energy, counter gain, Crispin, be able to get the Obsidians off. We obviously can still do the Glass Trumpet plays by using the Terapagos, and then one of the other things as well, I added 2 copies of the Terapagos instead of just the 1 copy of Cyclozar, mostly because of the fact that I want to cut the Heavy Ball. And so I just want to be able to run 2. If 1 gets prized, it's not that big a deal. we want to make sure that we have availability to it. So I also upped the nest ball count before they were allowed to kind of get away without running it because of the fact that they were running the Precious Trolley. But I actually don't feel like Trolley does too much work in this matchup. You're better off just having a bunch of nest balls, a couple buddy poffin. I did keep the EXP share though, because we do want to make sure we're able to do is just make sure that even if our Hydreigon gets knocked out, we can still continue that Obsidian play. So having one copy of the EXP share is totally fine, but we just don't want to be too redundant about it.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. One other thing that I think is kind of important too with this change, we did also kind of cut a lot of the extra supporters where we kind of have a much thinner line. So we just have the Arvins that we're looking for, so that way we can go for the de-evolution, the counter gain, or the evolution, or even our EXP share whenever we need. We upped the Iono line and kept the Crispin, but we did cut things like the Surfer, the Carmine, as well as the Tauros, since a lot of them just kind of become redundant. We don't really need them, and we want to just make sure that our initial game plan is the thing that we are achieving as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. That's one of the best ways to go about deck building in general. What's your goal? How do I get there quickly?
But yeah, is there any other changes that you would make to this, looking at the list now?
Yeah, Professor Gnome, really like your approach here. Your inclusion of Neo Upper Energy is standard, and all the Hydreigon decks I've played and looked at over the past few weeks have included Neo Upper as the preferred A-spec, so well done there. The only, well, I guess there's two changes, one minor, one major. The only major change I would make is dropping a Terapagos for a Petra EX. It guarantees, like if your opponent wants to boss your Blissey to stall, it guarantees, and maybe your switch is already used, it guarantees that Hydreigon gets into the active no matter what. So block lax and that kind of stuff, and just regular stalling in general. And on that note, a poisoned Hydreigon with its main attack that does 200 damage in one shot, Raging Bolt at 240 HP and below. And it'll be 2 off of one-shotting a Blood Moon Ursaluna. So the Binding Mochi inclusion, maybe over maybe a Nest Ball, maybe a Pokegear, would be really good too, to just give it that little extra edge just in case, because you face those big basics and you're like, oh, I'm a Hydreigon, I'm a stage 2, rawr, go me. But then it's like, oh, I just can't get this little extra damage, and the Binding Mochi takes care of it.
Yeah, actually, I think the Petron's a really smart play.
Thank you. Yes. I liked thank you for that qualification at the beginning. The person who wants this deck modified didn't want any F-block cards. The other thing I was thinking of was the inclusion of Dark Patch to get the Petrunt set up on the bench. But without the Dark Patch, that's a completely moot point. So I like your EXP share as well. You could put it on the Petrunt if your Hydreigon gets KO'd, bring up the Pecha, Darkness Energy for turn, and all of a sudden you're doing 60 times the number of prize cards taken. So Petrunt acts as like a kind of a secret backup attacker as well.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I could see cutting one of the Terapagos for that. I think that would actually be a very good play. Yeah, definitely a good pick there.
Thank you. Yes, and otherwise, Hydreigon at this point in the meta, in the format, is just kind of clunky. So I think what this deck is trying to do, it could definitely work, thankfully, now that we have Glass Trumpet. But yeah, I think it seems pretty solid otherwise. I mean, it's going to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, I definitely think as well, post rotation, this'll kind of have more life available to it. Obviously, that's what the build is kind of inspiring for. A little bit of a hot take. I think post-rotation, Hydreigon and Archaludon, I think, are both going to be incredibly strong decks going into post-rotation. But, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, do we want to jump to the deck submitted, your first deck?
My first deck, sure. We have a Galvantula EX, which is known for its second attack, which item locks for 180 base damage for a grass, lightning, and fighting energy. The deck submitted has a 3/2 knockdown line, as well as a baby Galvantula, a grass type, which, when fully charged, will one-shot a Charizard EX. It also has a 2/2 line of Pidgeot EX and Pidgey, as well as 2 Fan Rotoms. And, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever had any experience playing Galvantula EX, pretty powerful second attack. Galvantula is pretty clunky, though. It was a big letdown once we started to really get a feel for it. So if you want to play Galvantula, just be ready to kind of maybe make some sacrifices to what your expectations are for maybe a rogue type of deck. I'm not trying to let you down, just trying to give you a fair warning. The deck that was submitted was, for the most part, pretty straightforward for what you want to see in a Galvantula deck. It's a Terra type, so it has, you want to get knocked out for the knocked out trainer engine. I see what the trainer is trying to do here. I just made some really quick modifications with my build. And so if we shift over to the other one, you'll see that I took out the Pidgeot line, and therefore both of the Fan Rotoms and the rare candies that go with it. The original build also had a Giovanni's Charisma, which says you can remove an energy from your opponent's active to put one on your own active Pokemon. I love Giovanni's Charisma as an idea. I just wonder if it's a bit unnecessary here, and I say that with kindness. I'm not trying to put anybody down. The reason why is because you can use another supporter for turn, like, say, Crispin, to charge up your Galvantula in one turn with the Sparkling Crystal. Because if Galvantula's Fulgurite item lock attack discards all of the energy, if you don't want to use Sparkling Crystal, or you can't, I added a second Power Glass in place of it to give just more of a guarantee for maybe the second or third Galvantula you get on the board. Also added another line of the Magnemite Magneton, which, when Magneton KOs itself, and you take 3 energy from your discard and apply it to any lightning Pokemon you want, so you can get the Fulgurite attack up and ready the very next turn. I also decided to add 2 Miraidon EX to guarantee we get a Joltik and a Magnemite down, or even my other edition of the Iron Hands EX. Because the Joltik is energizing 4 energies a turn, 2 lightning and 2 grass, you can energize Iron Hands in one turn and very quickly and easily get some big damage and KOs on the board, taking extra prizes. The other thing is that while I love Pidgeot as a search engine, it's super powerful. It is very, I don't want to say splashable, but you can fit it with pretty much any archetype you want. I opted to go with the Pheasantipity because your Joltiks and your Hoot Hoots, maybe your Knockdowns, are relatively low HP. You want to guarantee yourself that draw 3. So, you can draw 3, get a Knockdown, get 2 more cards, and it starts to flow in this way. Now that I'm looking at this deck, I forgot to drop the Feather Ball for the Pidgeot, but that's okay. I'd probably add another Knockdown in the process. Briar is a really interesting choice here. I decided to keep it because I like giving cards get some love that don't get any love. Galvantula's first attack is it 100 or 110 plus another 110 if the opponent's Pokemon is an EX. That's extremely powerful. You could get away with playing Galvantula in this way with nothing else. And to guarantee that we get the Knockdown, the Magnemite, or the Galvantula, I also included 2 copies of Ultra Ball, just as some extra backup. Possible changes to this deck. A lot of Galvantula decks are running Pikachu EX and Metal Energy just to give that big 300 one-shot KO to pretty much everything. So I could definitely see dropping something like a Briar, and definitely this Feather Ball, Lost Vacuum, maybe a Terra Orb, to get that extra Metal Energy and that one Pikachu in. I really like the inclusion of 3 Night Stretchers, for getting that necessary energy back as well in case you need to attach for turn. So that's the deal here. You could do Fulgurite for the item lock relatively easily, stick with the first attack, and then you have Iron Hands as a backup attacker. So Professor Gnome, offhand, what would you say you like and dislike here?
So my immediate changes in my head that I would make, personally, I would cut the Briar. I'm a really big fan if you're gonna have an expanded bench like this, because they are running the area 0 underdepth, is I think I would put the Pikachu in just because you want to get the expanded bench as quickly as possible. So I would end up cutting the Briar, adding Pikachu, especially because you already have the Terra Orb. so it's going to make finding it a little bit easier. You do have the Miraidon as well. So what I'd probably end up doing is cutting the Briar and one Terra Orb, adding in Pikachu and a Squawkabilly, since I really like Squawkabilly in setup decks like this, where like you just need to get everything out and get prepared for the next turn as quickly as possible. I would honestly, actually, I'd probably keep the Terra Orb. I would cut Briar and the Feather Ball for that, like a Pikachu and a Squawk. And then as for the metal energy for it, I'd probably just end up cutting like one fighting. Just add like the one metal you need. You can get it back really easily, so you don't really need multiple copies unless it's prized, which is just kind of unfortunate. I'm willing to take that, you know, small percentage.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. And I see where you're coming from. Like your Squawkabilly Terra Orb Area Zero Under Depth's comment was perfect. I think that's exactly what this deck wants and needs to do. Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would do is probably at that point as well run like one. I'm not sure what I would cut for it yet. Maybe one Earthen Vessel, maybe. Or actually, I'd probably cut Lost Vacuum. Because I'm trying to think of what I would want to remove with Lost Vacuum that this deck would struggle against. I would probably cut the Lost Vacuum then, and in place of the Lost Vacuum, I would end up putting like one Tauros or like a Penny just to be able to pick up the Squawkabilly later on, just to remove the prize card liability. And that way, like, even if I don't end up going Squawk, right, and I just have like the extra Miraidon on the board or whatever, I can always just pick up to remove the liability later on.
Awesome. I completely agree with you there. That's a really good observation. Should we move into your next deck?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was looking over the list and trying to think of like if there was anything else that I would make a change to. Because the original list I do like, but I think some of the additional cards, like, so something that I like about your list in comparison is removing the Pidgeot line not only helps you save 4 cards, like you don't have to run the Pidgeys and as well as the Pidgeots, but it also saves you on having to run the rare candies, which aren't really doing much for the deck. Like, it kind of doesn't benefit you all that much. You already have to run Fan Rotom, so one of the other problems I have is with and this is with the Area Zero Underdepth Stadium card, is it only turns on once Galvantula hits the board. You don't have like a basic to use, and so that's where I feel like Pikachu would come in super handy, and its ability just making it, you know, not be able to just be bossed and removed is super helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll jump into the second list.
Cool.
So the second list is really interesting. I love the concept. For anybody looking at it, the printout for it on Limitless is like a little bit weird because of the rarities they submitted it in. Like kind of break up some of the cards, but I guess you'll see it when you look at the list. I really like the idea of this. The Feraligatr focusing on not its attack, but technically the Crocodile attack to be able to switch, so kind of playing off the hit and run strategy using Relicanth, which I think is really cool. The issue that I had when kind of testing the deck and playing it is the Monkey Dories are really good for the deck. Obviously, once you use Feraligatr, use its ability, stack the damage, you want to be able to use the Monkey Dory to move that damage off and just add even more kind of ping damage. But running 3 copies, it just becomes a little bit redundant. You don't really need that. And then also, the Survival Brace is a cool concept to be able to throw on one of your Pokemon, but if you're getting into a situation where you just need your Ogerpon to survive like one more turn, you're probably losing anyway. More often than not, it kind of just becomes a little redundant. The main issue as well is the fact that you have to you're putting a lot of cards into making the strategy work. So this is another example much similar to the Blissey deck, which is kind of why I wanted to do these ones side by side, is the commitment to making this strategy work costs more than what you're getting out of the strategy. And so using the survival band, right, or the survival brace, once that's gone, you have to go and use the Silene to try to get it back, and then hopefully you coin flipped, you get it back. Then you have to pal pad, get the Silene back, Arven, find it again, and try to keep looping that. And like the reality is you're probably not going to be able to get it. And then you've had to spend like 4 cards in order to try to get it to work a second time, which kind of sets you up to kind of be hurt later on. The other thing as well is the supporter lineup is something I would edit. I think Roxanne is fine, but having 4 Iono and then 1 copy of your Irida, 1 copy of Lana's Aid, and then 1 copy of the Conviction is just like you're just gonna be stuck Ionoing all the time. And if you're in a position where you're like ahead in a game, you typically don't want to be Ionoing yourself, which isn't really great, especially when Irida is very, very powerful, or Arven as well for this deck. I would kind of change the lineups there. But yeah, so that's like my immediate critique when looking at the original list. If there's anything that you see about it as well that you want to point out, Dr. Red?
Yeah, personally, I agree with like pretty much everything you said. Just looking at it on my screen, what immediately jumps out at me is the ace spec. Feraligatr is doing damage to itself. Ogre Pawn is either, getting destroyed or it's not being touched at all. I think the idea, and you touched on this, is like get the damage counters off with the Monkey Dory. You're gonna get hit anyway. I'm not really sure I feel that too much. A 1/1 knockdown. I see it. I might either drop it or go 2/2. And the 1 copy of Irida with a water heavy deck is kind of, you need more Iridas. Yeah, those are my immediate thoughts. And I agree with your comment about the Roxanne. Love Roxanne, I'm a control player. I love the disruption, but it's like, is this the place for Roxanne? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we want to switch over to my edited list, the edited list, what I went for is, again, I want to keep the spirit, right? So we still want to be playing that switch style of Feraligatr. We don't want to go and ignore that. So I want to keep the 4-3-3 line, making sure that our Crocodile is still our, main usage. One of the things that I did is that I changed the Relicanth line to a 2/2, since we, one, don't want to have our Relicanth prized and not be able to get it out. Obviously, there's the Heavy Ball, but sometimes we want to make sure that we're using Heavy Ball for something else, especially because of the fact that we changed the lineup, so we only have 1 copy of Mimikyu, 1 copy of Ogerpon. So if our Relicanth and Ogerpon is prized and we're stuck with Heavy Ball, we don't really want to be stuck in that scenario. So I went with a 2/2 Relicanth line, or 2 copies of Relicanth. You can switch that ratio up if you want, but also with a deck that relies on it so heavily to use its attack, I'm never a fan of just having the 1 Relicanth, because if it just gets bossed up and you don't have a way to get it back, your deck just doesn't work. So I hate being put in that position. Also, similar to the other deck, I did change the ace spec to Neo Upper Energy. This is because one of the things that I found when it comes to playing the kind of hit and run style of Feraligatr is you do a good amount of damage, right? That's what makes Feraligatr so interesting as a hit and run attacker. But also sometimes you just need to be able to play an energy down and just swing big. And so that's why I upped the counts of Irida, added in Rare Candy as well, so that way I can bypass the Crocodile stage if I need to. Just make a Feraligatr and swing big to get early damage, make early aggressive plays if I have to, and be able to kind of put pressure on the board while I build up the Crocodiles, just because it is going to take a little bit of time to do. I also changed the Monkey Dory line to just having 1 of them. I think it is very good to have that additional damage, but the main thing is having 3 of them just kind of takes up way too much space, as well as the multiple dark energies. They only really help the Monkey Dory. They don't help anything else. So we don't want to take up too much of our space with that. The other thing that I also did was I added a copy of Klefki, just because Klefki is so broken. There's so many decks that just lose if Klefki is in the active because they can't Squawkabilly turn 1. Let's take like the Miraidon matchup, for example, which would be a very bad matchup for this deck because of the fact that they're just going to go Iron Hands and just amp you over and over and over again. if you have Mimikyu in the active, or not Mimikyu, sorry, if you have the Klefki in the active, there's a good chance that like there's nothing they can do because they can't go Miraidon for anything. They can't Squawkabilly. Like they're just kind of stuck turn one, and that's super impactful if that's going to be like the matchup you're up against. One of the other things too is that I did also for the same concept is I add the reversal energy because we want to make sure that we are getting the damage down and just kind of in the ability that we can make a comeback because this deck probably is going to get a little bit behind with the slower pace that it has to set. And I also added in one copy of Kieran. Since, again, we won't have the extra Monkey Dory pings all the time, we do want that additional damage where we can just drop the, Neo Upper Energy onto the Feraligatr, swing big, add the extra damage from the Kieran. If we have Monkey Dory as well, we are able to one-shot Charizard EX with the additional damage between Monkey Dory and the Kieran, which is always good. And yeah, that's kind of the main thing. We also added in the barrel line, since I just think it's a little bit more consistent to just have throughout our game than relying on Noctowls, because we don't really have a way to reset them, and we don't want them taking up the board space, since we did also cut the stadium. So we won't have that access, so we want to make sure that the stuff we do have on our bench is serving a purpose consistently throughout the game. The last major two changes that I made was adding in the Greninja. Since we want additional draw, this deck will suffer a little bit because a lot of our supporters that we want to play get us cards but not new hands, since we cut the Iono line down a little bit, and the Irida line is really good for helping us set up new mons, but it doesn't actually draw us like deeper into our deck. So we want to make sure we have Greninja available as well as a copy of Manaphy, just because there's a lot of things that can snipe the bench right now, especially with Regidrago in the format still, and a single Kyurem just kind of makes us lose, so we need Manaphy.
Love it, yeah. Agree with everything you said. Your inclusion of the reversal Neo Upper accounts for the energy lost by Greninja, although you do have a Night Stretcher, but yeah, that's really good to have. Push comes to shove, you could also use Greninja as another attacker. Really love your inclusion of Fezandipity. It's a single price deck. It's probably going to get donked a handful of times. Maybe turn 1 or turn 2 with all those big EX decks. But then again, it's just how the format is. So yeah, Fez is great for draw power. I was going to comment on your no Area 0, but you took care of that. Also, really like your inclusion of the 4 Iridas for a water deck. That's like necessary. It's going to be real sad for water players when Irida goes away. There's two thoughts that occur to me offhand. The only thing I might consider including is a Blood Moon Ursaluna, just for that big old fashioned cleanup attack. But again, if Feraligatr's taking big hits, I don't know. Maybe you got Ogerpon there as well. And my only other thought offhand is to say something about Squabbit. You could do the Squabbit Beaverell thing, but your bench is really way clogged. You have one Totodile, one Relicanth, one Monkey. You got Fez, you got the Beaverell, then a Monkey, then a Mimikyu or an Ogerpon. So maybe Squabbit isn't necessary for draw, and you're discarding things with Ultra Ball to make room for So the Neo Upper, the reversal, I think are really key here for making sure Feraligatr can function with your draw power and Greninja. Yeah. So, any thoughts on that, Professor Gnome, Squabbit Blood Moon?
So, I definitely like the Blood Moon because like I said, one of the main issues with Feraligatr and why we haven't seen it succeed to the levels that I think we all hoped it would, at least I know that I hoped it would, is even though it's only 2 energy, building up into a stage 2, and being able to like get it set up and everything like that can like just become a little bit harder, especially as the game goes on, trying to find either a rare candy, get yourself into the, evolve from the Crocodile, like get everything set up, can be a little bit cumbersome, especially as the game goes on. So being able to just slap down a Blood Moon and swing is always really good. Especially too, like Blood Moon's a little bit beefier. You're playing a predominantly one prize deck, so you can actually kind of give up a Blood Moon if you have to, as well, if you just need something a little bit beefy in the front, or risk kind of, getting yourself just for free, because one of the other things too is because you're playing a predominantly one prize deck, you're going to be in a situation where your opponent's going to end up on one prize more often than not. Which does mean you won't even need the energy for Blood Moon. You'll just be able to straight up attack, which is also very nice. So I could definitely see including that. I'm curious what I would cut. I think would be the biggest thing. I could see cutting. What would I cut if I was going to add that in? I think I could
counter switch net.
I could cut one Relicanth, but I'm not like happy about that. I think the easiest would maybe just to be cut one rare candy. I think.
Yeah, because you got 3 Croconaw. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could probably cut one rare candy.
So, person, speaking of rare candy, and we have a couple, can't think of that word, tools, rescue board, evolution. What would you say to an Arven or two? And again, I think the same question comes up. What are we cutting? Maybe it's my OCD, but like my gut instinct when it comes to cutting is I always go to my 4s and 3s. Like, okay, do I really need 4 Irida? Probably. Do I need 3 Ultra Ball? Do I need 3 Buddy Buddies? Maybe. I think Arven could help, but it's like, again, like that cutting question kind of comes in. Yeah. Got the Greninja, got the Fez. Not too sure. Any thoughts on Arven?
Yeah, I think Arven could work. If I was going to run Arven, I think I'd retool the list a little bit just to include a couple different tools that I may run. So I could see, like, if I'm going to be doing that, probably also adding in, like, a Defiance Band as well, just to try to get, like, max value out of the Arven. And if I were to do that, I would probably end up cutting one... I'd probably cut one Nest Ball, one Irida, to do like 2 copies of Arven, and just doing like a 3-2 line of Irida and Arven. And then what I may do as well is I don't want to cut one boss. I could cut I could cut one Buddy Poffin as well, but I probably don't love that. I think I would probably just add in the 2 Arven that way, cut one Nest Ball, one Irida, and then it would be up for debate on what I use to cut for... I'd probably just cut, like, one random Water Energy to just make room for the Defiance Band.
I feel you there. That makes sense. Yeah, Defiance Band's also a good idea. Falling behind a single prize decks, yeah.
Yeah, because that would allow you to pick up as well.
Oh, yep.
All right, cool.
I agree with I'm just looking... Good. Yeah.
Do we want to jump into your second deck?
Sure, that's fine with me.
Awesome.
Really liked how you went through. Yeah, I really liked how you went through. I was just looking over your deck list real quick. I liked how you dropped the knockdown line. Yeah, that was real good on the A-Spec in the Roxanne. Yeah, real good. Awesome. We all agree on that. All right, so my second deck list is what's called Walls or Wall Stall. Or if you're going to be technical, as I usually am, it's called Damage Control. You're trying to stop your opponent from just doing damage to you outright. There are 4 copies of Mimikyu with Safeguard ability, which takes care of all damage, Pokemon Vs and EXs. Noivern EX with its Covert Flight attack stops all damage done to this Pokemon by basic Pokemon. Ogerpon, Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX prevents all damage from Pokemon that have abilities, whether they are single or multi-prized. Blood Moon Ursula EX as a finisher, Rotom V for draw power. Mist Energy to stop stuff like Roaring Moon's attacks on Mimikyu. The Frenzied Gouging on Mimikyu and all effective attacks. 2 DTEs, and then 2 Psychic and 2 Fighting so that Ogerpon and Mimikyu can attack. This is your typical, let me get stuff on the board. Let me try to just break down your resources kind of stuff. One really interesting inclusion here that I have never seen in any damage control list is top row on the right. I'm not sure if it's Rika or Rika. 3 copies of that. You look at the top 4 cards of your deck, choose 2, and put the other 2 on the bottom of your deck. It's kind of like a poor man's Chorus's experiment. We also have inclusions of Lost City and Town Store, quite interesting, and Luxurious Cape and Counter Gain. Very interesting deck list. I get where the author is coming from. I'm very much in favor of this kind of feel for it. It's just that I wonder, even with Rotom, I wonder if the deck might be slowed down a bit. And it's not that in shifting over to my modified list, I didn't take it out because, of the F block and that kind of a thing. I took it out because, as we all know, Rotom is a two-prize liability. There's a lot of block Snorlax decks now that aren't running Rotom. It's just doing 4 Laxes, some Klefkis, and Mimikyus, maybe an Ogerpon. And as odd as it might sound, I think Rotom actually hurts damage control. So I opted to drop the following cards. I dropped the Blood Moon, the Rotom, Luxurious Cape, Counter Gain, Town Store, Lost Zone, Forest Seal Stone that goes with the Rotom. There's a copy of Chorus's Tenacity for the stadiums and the Special Energy. I dropped 2 Mist Energy, and I also dropped all 3 of the Rika, or Rika, whatever it's called. I added an additional Ogerpon EX. I added a Super Rod. I added a Penny. There were 3. I added a 4th one. I added 1 Turbo Energizer, TM Turbo Energize. I added another Crispin. I added 2 Ultra Balls for getting your Noyaverns out. I added 2 Kofus. I'll put 2 cards on the bottom of your deck and draw 4. And then I also added 4 copies of Chorus's Experiment, because that's basically our draw engine for this deck. And as the match goes on, you can just get rid of things you don't need anymore, whatever it might be. So the idea here is, whether you start with Mimikyu, Ogerpon, or Noiabat, what you're basically doing is saying to your opponent, hey, come and get me. I don't think you can get through this wall I'm putting up. It seems counterintuitive, because typically, we all know what Pidgeot does. We all know what Beeperel does. You really are just saying right from the beginning, I'm going to depend on my regular draw power, rather than like an engine. Like, the drawing is the engine, which sounds kind of bad, but I've seen this work. These types of damage control decks do win online tournaments. Damage control, or walls if you prefer, is pretty good. It's definitely respectable. You will have issues with it. The one thing this kind of archetype struggles with is the massive amount of switching out options. Catcher can destroy this deck in a second. There's just nothing you can really do about it. Night Stretcher, let me just go through some of the cards. Night Stretcher is there to get back any energy and Pokemon just to put back on your board right away. So if Dust Noir takes out your Mimikyu, but then Charizard can't take care of Ogerpon, and your opponent is low on Dust Noir, not getting them back, etc., put Mimikyu back on the bench just in case something happens. Penny for picking up Noiabat, just in case it gets too much. Same with Ogerpon. The Crispin is there to energize the Ogerpon, the Mimikyu, and the Noiabat or Noivern all at once. Energize for the same reason. If you have a Mimikyu in the active, it's not going to work, but Noivern will. As your Noiabat, Noivern, etc., and be done with it. We don't really run any switches, because typically whatever's in the active is fine with us. You can always just attach, retreat. Some possible changes that one might make to this deck is the inclusion of Rock Chestplate. The 30 off for the Ogerpon, the decrease of 30 damage on something that doesn't have an ability is actually really, really big here. Sometimes you'll get like a dinky like basic or stage 1 that evolves into an EX with an ability, and then like your opponent will just use that Pokemon to just like chip away at the Ogerpon. But with the 30 damage reduction, it really makes it hard, especially if you get a Penny, just pick it up, start all over again. You also might include a copy of Energy Lotto to get your energies much easier. That is one of the kind of pitfalls of a deck like this, especially if you're not going to run the Chorus's Tenacity, as this deck does not, is to like, okay, how do I get my energies? If I want a special energy, not just the Earthen Vessel that's included here, or Crispin, if I can't find any of them, I need another option. Energy Lotto is a good idea. You might also consider Patrol Cap. I know it's a tech card that's very, very specific. Patrol Cap, when attached to your Pokemon in the active, prevents all forms of milling, whether it's from a Pokemon's attacks, effects, and the attack itself, the abilities, or trainer cards like Misfortune Sisters. But, stuff like that, like Hydreigon, for example, just put it on your Mimikyu and let it sit there while you do damage, and then play the Technical Machine Devolution to take care of whatever's underneath. Also include a Silene for getting Devolution back, or whatever else you need. Like, let's say a DTE. Your DTEs are gone. You need one for Noivern. And on that note, you might also include a pal pad for any number of these supporters you need, especially Penny and Kofu or Boss's Orders, just to keep your deck from not only just to keep yourself from decking out, but also to refresh your resources so you can continue to control. So this type of, again, like I said, this type of archetype has its faults, but when you've mastered all of the matchups and you know exactly what your opponent is running, as control players typically need to do, this is a force to be reckoned with. One more thing I will note before I stop talking is the inclusion or exclusion of Milotic EX. Milotic EX has an ability that stops all damage done to it by Terra types. Well, the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, Terra type Pokemon EX are rule boxes, and Mimikyu takes care of them. So why take up your deck space with a stage 1 that needs to be charged up with a Water into Colorless, although it does induce sleep at the end of the day, when Mimikyu will just do the job. So Milotic is worthy of your consideration, but I excluded it from this build because I think Mimikyu just makes things a lot easier. So that's what I have to say about this build and this archetype in general. Professor Gnome, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm kind of looking over the list like right now, and I think the original list is interesting. I agree with cutting out some of the cards. I think Rotom definitely can be cut. I agree with cutting out like the Lost City as well. And there's a couple of other cards. The Rika, I think Rika, how is it pronounced?
Yeah.
Whatever.
It's either Rika or Rika. Yeah.
Rika. We'll go with Rika. I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
I've never seen that card before, so maybe it's absolutely correct and this person is cooking, but I'm gonna, on paper, think it's probably not the best choice. And yeah, I think one of the problems with the deck that they have right now, and this is a weird kind of way of phrasing this, but the Lost City kind of works against you in a weird way because
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, because typically what happens, and you know, I'm not the largest control player, but I play against it a lot. What ends up happening a lot of times is based on your deck, your opponent will just kind of have one card in the active, right? Because it's walling you and you don't want to get switched around and all the things like that, right? More often than not, you know, they'll kind of just have like the Ogre Pawn in the active and leave it there. But the problem is like, if you have Lost City and you lose out on one of your Ogre Pawns, even potentially two, you can't recycle them anymore, and you're also not taking knockouts that would be relevant enough for the Lost City to help you. I feel like would be the biggest issue, running like with that card being on the board, because you play such a low count of everything. Like if you lose two Noibats, well, like what are you gonna do?
Exactly. And even if you're getting Dust Noired by something in Dust Noir, I think that Lost Save would put Dust Noir into the Lost Zone. Like,
It does.
Something like Charizard, like you already have an auto win anyway, so just sit there and just take it. What you said, like, what you just said is exactly what I thought. Like, yeah, you're probably going to get KO'd at some point. Don't give your opponent, don't help your opponent. Just get your Pokemon back or leave it there if it's useless and just move on.
Yeah, switching over to the list that you edited, I do like the list. I don't like Kofu, but I just don't like the card.
Yeah.
I'm just not a Kofu fan. I think
That's
one
fine.
of the things for me, personally, is I'm curious on the one Iono. I think is my biggest thing, because I feel like with a deck like this, because your damage output is so low, you probably won't end up like... I think the thing that scares me with a deck like this is running the 4 copies of the Colress alongside the very kind of slow, lengthy game that this kind of deck typically ends up having. With only having the one Iono, I'm like scared you're gonna like deck yourself out.
Yeah, that's definitely a legit concern. Yeah.
So I feel like I would either... I mean, I guess there is the Super Rod, but I feel like I would add Iono, like add a second copy of Iono probably, just for my own safety. Like honestly, that's what I probably would do. I'd probably cut 2 Kofu, add 2 Iono, and then I would cut 1 penny. I think, yeah, because my other concern is how many supporters there are without innate draw, and I feel like I'm just too unlucky. Like, I feel like a normal person would be able to pilot this fine, but I feel like if I play it, my entire hand is going to be supporters, because you're already running like 4 Penny, 4 Arven, 4 Colress. There's another 6 between the 2 Kofu, the 2 Boss, the 2 Crispin. I'm just too unlucky of a player. I'm going to end up with a million supporters in my hand every time, but I'm not sure what I would replace them with off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a seriously legit critique, Preston Evan. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Decking out is a very big reality here. We could put Pidgeot V to solve our problems. I just don't. I've never seen Pidgeot V in any of the builds, and I didn't exclude it just because I never saw it. It's just something that didn't occur to me until we were talking just now. Yeah, and Iono also has an innate draw power too. Just forget recycling your hand. I could see definitely cutting down to 3 pennies.
Actually, the more that I think about it, I actually like the Pidgeot V because it does enable you to have Seal Stone, which is super clutch. It does stop you from decking out, which is good against like other control matchups, like if you're in some sort of mirror. But also what I was thinking about is like changing the stadium lineup, because I don't hate having stadiums in this, especially just in general with how many stadiums are in our game right now. Where like a lot of decks are relying on the Area 0. So just being able to bump them on their own is already effective. But I think there's a lot of decks that could be pretty annoyed by certain stadiums. So, like, for this deck, you're already running a pretty small bench. So just being able to play, like, the Collapsed is probably pretty beneficial. So, like, running 1 copy of Collapsed, I think, would be fine. As well as you could be really annoying. It all depends, because obviously this would affect you a little bit as well. But depending on matchup, it could be nice to have the Jamming Tower, or even against certain matchups, I feel like it would be nice to have like the Pokemon League headquarters as well. Like if you're going to be using Noivern or something. But I guess it doesn't really matter, because some of those matchups would be mitigated anyway just by like the Pokemon you're running. But I still feel like a copy, at least 1 copy of Collapsed could be really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting that bench control down. What you said about it's probably going to be mitigated by something like Noivern anyway. But yeah, it could. Yeah, it could be. I mean, it's still. I think you agree. It's just for someone like me. We just love disruption. We just want to make it harder anyway. I think as you were talking, it occurred to me maybe Gravity Mountain for taking those stage 2s. Yeah, I mean, there's no stage 2s here, so bringing a stage 2 down. Maybe like to speed up a KO, like from a Charizard or something, maybe. But I mean, just like you said, having a bump is always a good idea.
Actually, that reminds me. Actually, sorry to cut you off, but on the opposite end of Gravity Mountain, you could play the Lively Stadium, right, and give like all your basics 30 plus.
Mm-hmm.
And so then like Mimikyu becomes 100. Then like with Bravery Charm 150.
And that takes out a Dusknoir range too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, that could be really annoying, because also what ends up happening a lot of times, we see, like, the Charizard answer to being, like, around the Ogerpon is either, A, they have to go Canceling Clone, which they typically only have 1 of, but their other option is to go Dusknoir twice. But if you have Lively Stadium and the Hero's Cape, I don't think they can, right?
Mm-hmm. On the Mimikyu, yeah, so you'd have 200. You mean on the Mimikyu?
Sorry, on Ogerpon. They would have to go Dusknoir twice
on Ogerpon
to knock it out. But if you just have the stadium down, you don't even need any of the tool cards, right? Because double Ogerpon is 240. Or, sorry, double Dusknoir is 240, right?
It's 13 damage counter, so it'd be 260.
Oh yeah, my fault. So yeah, then it's just
You're fine.
Bravery Charm Stadium, and you would be out of the range. Or is my math wrong again?
No, your math is fine. And yeah, the only danger would be like they bump it back, but I mean, it could be mid to late game when that happens because because it depends on what they use their rare candies on. If they got the Pidgeot out, yeah, that's perfectly legit. I think typically what you do is you use Night Stretcher to put your Pokemon back on your bench and say, "Come do it again." But I think, yeah, like if you're afraid of like a big basic like KOing that has no abilities like Iron Hands trying to KO your Ogerpon, you have to stall for like 1 or 2 more turns. That might be the way to do it, and then that would give for those who like the Chorus's Tenacity, that would give you a reason to put Chorus's Tenacity back in.
Yeah.
Although the build you're looking, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be my biggest thing. I think I would probably... I would run the Collapse no matter what, because I just think Collapse is broken right now. Oh, actually, side note. This also is a thing that hurts us, admittedly. So, like, a lot of my answers will hurt us on this list a little bit. But I think that they don't hurt us enough because we can bypass them. I feel like you could actually just run the Temple of Sinnoh, right? Because you're just going to run Crispin anyway. So you don't need the double colorless to work, and then in certain matchups, like, you're just kind of fine. Because you just run Temple. So it shuts off any deck right now that's playing double turbo, so like Lugia and things like that. It helps you, because I feel like Lugia would be pretty difficult for this list. Because, like,
yeah,
what do you do if Chinchino just shows up?
Lugia is not a good matchup for control in general, in part for that reason, yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like running Temple of Sinnoh's fine. Just to kind of hope you can get past the Chinchino.
Yeah, I agree. The only qualification for Sinnoh is it turns off your mist energy. So I mean, not that you're inclined to play it against Roaring Moon. Like if you see Roaring Moon, like okay, Sinnoh is not coming out. It likes having stadiums for Calamity Storm, and it's going to turn off my mist energy, so Mimikyu's going to die, and that's not good. So yeah, I think if you want to have Sinnoh for like helping you against Terrapagos, because then it would force your opponent to find another Area 0, use 2 DTEs on it maybe, that would be a good idea, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also thinking too, because like the Cloth matchup right now, I feel like would be pretty hard because they do have outs to like whatever wall you have at the time, and they're able to switch super easily. But they do rely on just running the 4 double turbos as well as the Area 0. So if you can just bump them with the Temple of Sinnoh, I feel like that'd be like pretty difficult.
That too, and also like because even if like Noivern is in the active and you're gonna say, hey, your big basics can't touch me, but then they just poison you with Brute Bonnet and have Petra run there. Just be like, maybe a one-of Festival lead wouldn't be a bad idea, at least late in the match.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting as a tech for sure. Yeah, because I feel like that matchup could be difficult. That's where I feel like I would just... Is Jamming Tower just better there? No, because Jamming Tower doesn't matter, because Brute Bonnet can still poison.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we would have to tech for that matchup more than Lugia. Because Lugia is kind of on the way out, is where Cloth's kind of on the way up.
Yeah, exactly.
Festival
leads an hard in general, because I mean, what is?
Oh, I was saying Festival leads an interesting tech for that. Because you can't be poisoned.
Yeah. Nothing can be poisoned at all, yeah. So I guess the other... I mean, you could increase the lost vacuums here if you're really scared of Area 0 as well, but then you have to be careful you don't get rid of something you need, but that's always an issue with lost vacuum.
Yeah. I'm also curious, can you, I don't remember what this does, so I can't remember if it heals you or prevents, but there's the therapeutic energy, right?
Therapeutic energy prevents your opponent from being paralyzed, put asleep, or is it confusion?
Okay, but it doesn't stop
Yeah.
poison.
No, I'll just double check that. So is it the healing energy?
Because there's one that heals
medical
your
energy.
there's one that heals you 30, but there's another one that heals your special conditions, right?
Yeah, therapeutic energy. The Pokemon this card is attached to recovers from being asleep, confused, or paralyzed, and cannot be affected by those special conditions.
But it's not poison.
No.
I was gonna say we would cut one mist and add that, and then you're like golden.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, and the mist energy doesn't stop it because it's in a T on the brute, not an effective attack. But go on.
No, I was gonna say, oh well. That was me cooking. I was like, wait, can therapeutic energy just stop it? And then that would be insane, but it doesn't.
Can't have everything, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunate. But yeah, I think that kind of covers these different lists. I guess the one thing that I want to say, just as like an overview for all of these lists, and this is just like a deck building kind of fundamentals little section I want to do just for a couple seconds. One of the overarching themes of all of these decks and kind of the main criticism that I want to get through in reviewing them is when you're building your deck, make sure that you have a goal like in mind, which is very clear, right? We saw that in all of the lists that we reviewed today. What I think the issue is that a lot of the decks have the goal in mind, but end up kind of focusing too heavily on that theme or like direct objective. And so when that happens, you end up losing sight of like the larger game where your deck does what it's supposed to do in a vacuum, but actually getting it to perform when against other players and like against the board, it becomes harder and harder because your deck is heavily designed to operate in like a theory crafting form, and you have to test your deck out where like it's totally fine to build it this way initially, but as you test the deck out, you have to start making the edits to what the actual game looks like around you. So a great example of this is how we were just discussing changing. Obviously, therapeutic energy isn't the way that I thought it was, so that doesn't work. But you get the point. Like, we're trying to tech for the current metagame and the landscape that the game is currently in. Because we can build a really, really strong deck, but if it doesn't actually get designed or held up to what we're going to be facing, well, it doesn't really matter then. We kind of just threw cards together. And so once you have your goal in mind, right, I want to build a control deck or a hit and run, or I want to make a deck with Feraligatr, you have to start realizing what your objective is. Like, what matchups can you actually compete versus, and how are you going to do that in an effective way kind of outside of a bubble. So to give an example of this with the Feraligatr deck, we realized that one of our problems is obviously going to be Miraidon. We can't really directly just beat that matchup, but one of the things that we can do is tech in things like Klefki. We know that, which was missing from the original list. We know right now that Dracopult, or Regidrago, sorry, is one of the most popular decks at tournaments, and a Kyurem will just destroy us. So we have to make sure that the Manaphy is in our deck in order to kind of account for that. We know that Charizard is also an incredibly common deck, so we need to make sure that we have the Kyurem as well alongside the Monkey Dory in order to be able to have a shot at one-shotting the Charizard if it comes up, if we can't kind of hit and run and tag it down. So you have to be kind of prepared for what the meta looks like around you as well when it comes to deck building, where you don't want to just build in a vacuum of what you think could work if you were just playing by yourself, because at the end of the day, Pokemon is an incredibly complex game and it's not solitaire. You are playing with other people.
If I might say, very well said, Professor Gnome. I agree with everything you said. The only thing I can think of to add is just not only, ladies and gentlemen, to have fun in building, but just a reminder. So, Celio's Network said something that I very much agree with. He said, sometimes you just have a bad matchup, and that's the way it is. there have been regional winners who play decks with one, maybe two bad matchups, and they just don't hit them. So don't let the fact that your deck doesn't have answers for every last single archetype out there prevent you from playing it. If your only weakness, for example, is say Charizard, well, just deal with it. Maybe you don't hit Charizard. There's lots of other archetypes out there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very true point. That is definitely very very true. That there's a lot of different decks where even the best decks in the game, like let's take a great example of this is Charizard, right? You can be playing Charizard, and it's one of the best decks in the game, but you do lose if you play against Regidrago most of the time, right? It's a pretty Regidrago favored matchup. But that doesn't really matter if you don't run into Regidrago. You're just beating everything else because you're just the other best deck. And so that's how we've seen like multiple regionals, even in recent history, just have two Charizards facing off in the finals because a Regidrago player just didn't make it there. And we see it like, Miraidon was able to win a regionals because of the matchups that it went up against. It never had to deal with things like Charizard that it's going to probably lose against. We see this with Gardevoir. It does really well into certain matchups, loses to others. And so every single deck has just bad matchups. There's nothing you can do to beat every deck in the entire game, or everyone would just be playing that deck at tournaments. It would be broken. But that's just not the world that we live in. That's not the game we play. You can't tech for everything. You just kind of do the best you can.
Well said, Professor Gnome. Very well said.
But yeah, I guess that's it for this video. This is definitely something I would love to do again in the future. So if you guys have lists that you'd want us to review, please leave them down in the comments, so we can definitely check those out and do something like this again in the future. This was definitely a lot of fun, and be sure to let us know what else you'd want to see in this kind of format, as well as the other decks and stuff like that we'd love to review. But also, I guess just let us know if this format helped you, so we can tweak it, because this definitely is something that I want to do in the future, as well as kind of helping people learn how to deck build and like kind of more fundamentals. So hopefully you learned something. If you did, just let us know. And if there's something that you're kind of struggling on when it comes to deck building, just let us know. I'll be down in the comments and all that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, if you like the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff for the YouTube algorithm. And also definitely be heading down to the description, click the link, and go over to Control Players Unite YouTube channel. It's super super good, and he has a lot of wisdom to share outside of just this video. So yeah, that's just about it for me. Is there anything you want to add?
Thank you for your kindness, Professor Gnome. Gnome Nation, Control Nation, thank you for tuning in. We love you. Peace out, baby.
All right, peace out, guys. See you in the next one.